Pro School, we offer product management certificates online on our 20 campuses worldwide. And on top of that, we offer this kind of amazing product management events. So every week we have AMA sessions that we have in our private community in Slack every Tuesday. And then we have every Thursday these kind of live webinars. Feel free to go to proschool.com, go to events tab, so you can catch up and be ready to join any of our more than 30 events per month that we have in any location or the closest location that you have from where you live. So you can join any of our local meetups in the US, in Canada, in the UK, and the rest of the world. So you can be all the time like learning, and we can learn and grow together in this product management world. So it's time to start. So today I just want to present our guest. I would like to introduce to you Kara Rainsel. Kara is digital strategy, online marketing and product development specialist. She's online media like social, mobile, web, online advertising, emails, search, and emerging digital technologies to drive consumer engagement and achieve business and organization goals. Kara has been particularly effective in identifying and attracting new consumers via integrated digital platforms, growing revenue, and launching new online businesses and products. And her field of experience is diverse. She has worked on online media portals, digital marketing agencies, and nonprofit organizations. So you know how it works. So feel free to leave some questions in the comments on Facebook. She will have the pleasure to answer your question at the end of her presentation. Without further ado, let's welcome Kara. Kara, thank you for joining us today. So it's all yours.
Thank you, Jorge, and thank you to the Product School for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak to prospective product managers today. I wanted to take a moment, and I'm going to bring up my screen. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
so
perfect.
Thank you. So I just wanted to take a moment and also just give a quick overview too of how I got into product management, because I think that's important to know and understand that there's many paths into product management. I have a BA. My undergrad is in art history with a minor in French. So I come from a really strong liberal arts background. And I also have an MBA. I went into business school because I wanted to pivot into marketing and product management, and that's what it allowed me to do. So I've been working in product management and digital strategy for, gosh, almost 15 years now, working for a variety of companies like AOL, Wonderman, nonprofit organizations. And now I'm with the federal government, which was a long-term goal of mine, was to work for the federal government. And I currently work for 18F, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So there's many paths to being a product manager. You don't have to be a computer science major. You don't have to be an engineer. You can come from a variety of backgrounds. So just wanted to share that with you. So like I said, I work for 18F, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with 18F, but it is a digital agency by the government for the government. So I'm one of, maybe like 150 product managers, engineers, designers that work for 18F. It stands for 1800 F Street, which is where the agency is headquartered out of the General Services Administration in Washington, D.C. And it was started about 5 years ago as a way to help other federal agencies and also state agencies, build, buy better technology, better products, better processes, better platforms, and really kind of help transform how government does digital and make it a lot more user-friendly. I don't know if any of you have interacted with a government website or a government service, but sometimes it can be kind of frustrating as a user. And so 18F is really dedicated to making that whole process a lot easier and a lot more seamless. So one of the other things that really distinguishes 18F is that we focus on kind of taking the philosophy of give a man a fish for a day, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. We are very much in the camp of teach this person how to fish. So it's not only helping them build better products, but giving them the skills to become product managers so they can own that going forward. And then we can kind of, gracefully sunset our work so that they can own this and lead it going forward. So I think that's something that's very different in the government space, is that coaching model that we take. So that is just a little bit about 18F, because this ties in very closely to mission-driven product management. So the first place to start is just understanding the current landscape of product management in government. And, there's sort of like a couple things to keep in mind here. First is that product management in government is very much like in its infancy. It's not common, it's not widely spread. You do see pockets of it with different government agencies, but it is very much a new discipline within the federal government. And I would say that also applies to state and local levels as well. But that is to say that there is like a huge need for this. It's a little bit different than in the private sector, whereas product managers, revenues and profits are often what you're kind of aligning to. But when you're mission driven, working for the government, it's not about like making money or profits. You're really trying to fulfill the mission of your agency or your program. So it's a different way of looking at things. The need for product managers in government is huge, because there's so many products and services and platforms that are built that are unnecessary. I mean, I often say product management is about, building the right thing for the right people at the right time. But often what we see in government is that the wrong thing is built for the wrong people at the wrong time. And having product managers in place would really help alleviate that problem to ensure that, the needs of the user are being addressed, that you're building something that really makes sense for people, that it's the right time to build for them. So there is a huge need for product managers in the government. Another thing to know within government is that even when people are product managers, they often have another full-time job. It's hard to kind of get the capacity to have somebody be a full-time product manager. Often it's something where somebody has another full-time job that keeps them very, very busy, and they start to learn how to become a product manager sort of on the side. So that's also something that I had never encountered prior, because in the private sector, when you're a product manager, that's all you do. You're a full-time PM. In the government, it is often an additional responsibility kind of tacked on to your everyday responsibilities. So that can be challenging at times. It's a lot for people to take on. And then also too, what we're coming up against is that there's a lot of confusion around product management versus project management. Project management in government is very common, very widespread. And that's sort of like the mindset that drives a lot of things, is what I call a project mindset, which is, being timeline driven, requirements driven, not outcome driven. So what often happens when you have that like project management mindset is you end up building something that in theory meets your timeline, it meets your budget, it met your requirements, but that's no guarantee that it actually meets the needs or the outcomes that the program requires. And so often what we see and what we encounter are people are used to sort of those PJM, those project management methodologies, like asking for timelines that span a year, or asking for requirements, or defining user stories a year in advance, things that are not agile or iterative or what we would normally recommend doing. And so starting to shift that into a product focused mindset is a big part of this change. So I'll go to the next slide. How this relates to being mission driven is that, like I said, when you're mission driven, this isn't really about revenues and making money or making a profit. What it is about is helping fulfill the mission of the agency or the program that somebody is in charge of. So one of the biggest ways we see this happening, being kind of doing mission-driven product management work, first and foremost, is by building product capacity. And this is where the coaching comes into play. So a big part of what we do is identifying and training and coaching the government partners that we work with to become product managers. This is like one of the most critical things that we do. It is not, at the beginning, so it kind of goes in a phased approach. So first, it's identifying who those people are on the partner side. And they might volunteer, it might be a situation, where they are encouraged to take part, but we need a dedicated person who's going to become a product manager. And we start training, where it's very much us training them on sort of the fundamentals of becoming a product manager. We're taking everything we know and that we've done as product managers in the private sector, and we're applying those best practices to the government. Sometimes you have to make tweaks, but for the most part, we're really trying to follow like those best practices when it comes to product management. And then as time goes on, and we really start thinking about this from the very beginning of the project, that we are trying to establish that product management capacity on the partner side as early as possible, because eventually we will hand the project back off to the client. We are not into staying with the project for 5 years. We want to have this handed over, like a year max, that the person, they're running it now. So at the beginning, we're training them on the fundamentals of product management, and then we slowly start to pair so that they can start to practice with us, sort of co-creation, co-working in different things, co-creating like a product vision, co-creating a product roadmap, co-creating like, culling your backlog and things like that. At the pairing point, the partner, the PM in training, PMITs, as I like to call them, they would also start leading like sprint ceremonies. And again, we're there as sort of like a safety net to kind of offer coaching from the behind the scenes so that they can continue to improve. And then ultimately, the last step is that they are leading. So the partner agency, the partner PM is starting to lead all of this. They are owning it all, so that by the time we roll off, they will be running and owning and leading all of this. So by having these product managers live within the agency, like they are their best representative of their mission. And that's going to lead into my second point. And by having these product managers like live within the agency, they're in the best position to really transform and really be able to deliver on their mission in a way that they haven't been able to do before. So this goes into my second point, which is owning your mission. It means owning your outcomes. And we've seen this a lot with government, is that often so many things get outsourced, including that product management work. And this is really, really risky, because the contractor or the vendor that you work with, they don't represent the mission of the partner agency. They might be providing engineers, they might be providing designers or something like that, but they don't actually own the mission. They are just providing like a very specific kind of professional service. And so it's really critical that the mission be owned by a product manager who lives within that government agency. So that's something that we've seen be the most successful, and that we have seen a lot of risk introduced when it is not set up that way, when that product management function is outsourced to another vendor. It really makes it much harder to fulfill the mission, and it increases a lot of risk that the product will ultimately not be successful, because you don't have that voice of the mission of the user present in all the product decisions that are so key. And then the third part of this is looking at digital readiness. And this is a big part of what we do when we're working with a partner, is helping them become digitally ready. And often what we find is that a partner may be, there's sort of three legs to the stool, and they might be stronger in one area than the other, which is completely natural. But that you need to have all three present in order to be successful. And that if one of those legs is missing, obviously the stool is going to fall over. And we often will also get questions from partners saying, well, can we just do this part? Like, and unfortunately you could, but the likelihood of the product or the project not being successful goes up, astronomically. Like the three things really do work together. So the three parts of like digital readiness that we really focus in on is first having a product focused mindset. And I'll talk a few minutes about what that means, working iteratively, and then also being user centered. So the big one here is having that product focused mindset. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier on, which is having a product focused mindset is very different from having that project focused mindset, which is much more common in the government. With that product focused mindset, it's really about like setting that product vision, setting priorities, setting a strategy that directly supports like the achievement of that vision, being able to work iteratively, being able to measure outcomes. This is in contrast to like a project focused mindset, which is really about, meeting a timeline, hitting a certain kind of deadline, staying in a certain kind of budget. Not that budgets aren't important, but that, and looking at requirements. And this can be very dangerous because you're being asked to predict a lot of information at the very beginning of a project when you actually have the least amount of information available. And you're having to make these decisions then. And so again, that risk just increases considerably. And again, it's going to make it much harder to kind of do this more mission-driven work because you're not taking into account like the outcomes, you're not taking into account the users, you're not really thinking about like setting a real vision, that North Star, and having a product roadmap that supports it and having priorities. It's really just more about, these are all the things we decided at the very beginning, and it's maybe 6 months from now, and you're still executing against those requirements, but a lot of things can change in those 6 months. And there's no guarantee that what you're executing against now 6 months later is actually what people need. So in the end, you could end up with something that on paper checks all the boxes, like it was delivered on time, it had the requirements that were listed, it met these certain project milestones, but it may not actually meet the needs of any of your users because it doesn't allow for that. Having that more product focused mindset, you're always checking in with the user throughout. You're working in these incremental phases so that you're constantly getting in new information, testing and learning as you go. And that's actually a really good segue into sort of working iteratively. So this is not just like from the engineering point of view, but even from a procurement and acquisitions point of view, which is also a lot of work that we do at 18F, is helping government agencies do acquisitions in a better way that reduces risk financially and doesn't lock them into extremely long, sometimes extremely expensive contracts. So working iteratively, it's like working in 2-week sprints. That's typically what we do. And we're breaking that work down into like discrete pieces that can be accomplished in a single sprint. So that if you discover something, that doesn't work, or you encounter a blocker, it can quickly be resolved and you can quickly pivot, at like within 2 weeks, versus if you can't test and learn and make changes, and that just gets pushed closer and closer out to like when you would actually go live, that risk has increased exponentially, and it's pushed out so far that by the time you discover that something is wrong, it becomes very difficult to actually course correct at that point because that risk has just built to such an untenable level. So working iteratively, always working in these smaller pieces that allow for an opportunity to test and learn, pivot, feeding that information constantly back into the loop. And also from the procurement perspective, we also encourage that, working with smaller dollar amounts, smaller time frames, so that, again, you're not locked into these 5 or 10-year contracts where it doesn't work in an iterative way. You're just sort of locked in long term. We really advocate for smaller contract amounts, smaller lengths of contracts, so that they can remain responsive to the kind of work that needs to be done. Because again, you can be learning new things and you might realize, okay, we need to pivot, and you might need to slightly change the procurement terms to better accommodate now what you know. So it's also part of it. And then finally is just that being user-centered. This is the third leg of the digital readiness. And being user-centered it's something where I think a lot of people when they hear about it for the first time in the government, they get really excited because it is a different way of looking at things. Often it's been looked at from a stakeholder perspective, but again, stakeholders are not users. They can inform things, but you really want to listen to your users. And these users might be the public, members of the public who are interacting with a government site. They also might be other government employees who are using a tool internally, and they are users, and they can have different needs. But doing that research, watching users interacting with the tools and the products, talking to them about what their needs are. We do a lot of user research. We really want to understand who these folks are, kind of how they go about their day, how they go about their work, so that we ensure that what is being built is actually meeting the needs that they have. Maybe not the needs that we think they should have, but the needs that they actually have. And so when it comes to digital readiness, we really work with partners to get them on that path to being digitally ready. That, if you could have a product mindset and you might be user centered, but if you're still working in a waterfall way, it's going to be harder to achieve this sort of mission driven work, because you're not going to be able to work iteratively, or vice versa. You could be being able to work iteratively, and you might have that product focused mindset, but you're not really listening to the users. Instead, you're listening to like stakeholders, or you're just sort of like making it up as you go without really interacting with the people who are using your product in the end. So it's really critical that these three things are working in tandem. And again, you might be developing these skills kind of at different paces. Some might develop more quickly than others, but the goal is always to establish a strong sense of digital readiness on the government partner side. And so all three of these things, like owning your mission, owning your outcomes, and having that product capacity, really help establish this more mission-driven product management. Because again, we're not looking at building revenue or building profits. In fact, often what this helps to do is to mitigate costs or to do cost reduction. So it's measuring things a little bit differently, and that can be achieved by what we're talking about here with like having those smaller contracts, being able to frame projects and products in a better way, knowing that you don't need a team of like 30 engineers. You probably need a scrum team of like 5 or 6 to get the work done and be able to be a lot more nimble. So we look at cost reduction and cost avoidance, things like that, as sort of financial measures. So with that, I'm going to end there and pause and see if there are questions.
Cool. Thank you, Kara. Yeah, let me ask. I just asked if we have a few questions. So we have a peak of over 30 people. Now we have around 25. Let me see if someone asks something for you or for your presentation. In the meantime, we used to have 3 questions before we end the webinar. So while someone decides to ask something, I would like to join or jump first and then and ask you, because you mentioned that you have like 1 year as a PM in the company that you're right now, or something like that?
Almost 2 years with 18F with the government, and almost correct. 15 in the private sector.
Correct. So every time you join like a new company and you have the new role as a PM, what would you do in your first 30 days as a PM?
Sure. I'm actually going through this right now because I'm with 18F, but I'm transitioning to one of our sister teams. I'm going to be the PM for cloud.gov. And so I'm kind of going through this in real time, and certainly have done it too on many instances. I think when you're coming in as a product manager on it, whether it's a brand new company or maybe you're becoming the new PM on an existing team, one of the things I like to do is I like to listen, like especially to understand sort of like, being able to go to all the sprint ceremonies and observing the team and just kind of being a fly on the wall to see what is the team, like what kind of work is the team doing, and just observing. There could be things about a sprint ceremony that maybe seem a little unorthodox to me, but there could be a very valid reason why it is being set up that way. So I think the first thing is just listen, like just listen, observe, and start to kind of see where there seems to be the areas where you would want to where you could probably make the biggest impact as quickly as possible. I also try to get my hands on any user research that exists to start to understand more about the users. Is there a product vision already established? Is there a product roadmap already established? Reviewing those, understanding what the current priorities are, for the roadmap. So that's where I like to start. And then I also make the time to talk to everybody on the team one-on-one. I'm in the process of doing that right now. Where I'm just setting up what we call virtual coffees. 18F is pretty much a remote first place. So we're distributed all over the country. So we have virtual coffees and talking to folks and just learning more about the work that they do, the work that they like to do, so I can start to establish those relationships with the team members.
All right, cool, awesome. I already have 3 questions from the audience, so I'm gonna be fast. Could you speak a little bit about any product that you have been working in the capacity as a product manager?
Specifically with the government or just overall?
I think they don't mention, yeah, I can say overall.
Overall, I mean, a lot. When I was with AOL, I worked on AOL real estate, AOL personals. I worked on AOL careers. I launched a site at AOL called rentedspaces.com, which no longer exists. Sadly, it was sunsetted during the HuffPo merger with AOL. I'm now the PM for cloud.gov, which is a product that is out there in the space. I worked as a PM with 18F, working with the Federal Election Commission. So you can go to fec.gov. That was a project that I worked on. So all website driven. I worked on 4h.org when I worked at the National 4-H Council. So 4h.org was the website that I oversaw. So all very web driven. And yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. There is another question. In highly requirement-driven organizations, how does the product manager keep their focus on the mission and customer and not requirements for requirements' sake?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Like, how do you stay focused on the user and not just like creating a bunch of requirements?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's correct.
I mean, I think it comes with practice. Like, and we still see it, you know, like, what I think a good place to start is like really know your user. If you know your user, writing user stories is going to be a lot easier. So it's not just you're not writing requirements, you're writing user stories. So I would say get practice with writing user stories. Understand how do you translate a user need into an actual user story. It should be, I like to say, you know, story creation should be cheap. Practice it, you know, like writing a story shouldn't take you an hour. Like it should be pretty quick. You want to capture what that need is, what you're trying to do, and write it down. And so I know that like sometimes within organizations, there can be pushback, especially if they're used to a more waterfall approach of like writing all those requirements up front. But if you have the space within your organization to try working iteratively, working in maybe like, you know, we typically follow Scrum. I would say go for it, because I think you're going to find that, you know, you start small. Don't like write a whole bunch of user stories like months and months in advance. You're working on a very short timeline. There's a lot of things you can look up online that give you the format to use for writing user stories, and start to familiarize yourself between the difference, and then start seeing if you can practice taking what a user need is and writing it as a user story format versus writing it as a requirement, and try that out and see how it goes.
All right, awesome. There is another question from Jenna. She asked you, so do you have any advice for someone looking to make a career transition from the international development nonprofit industry to product management? What are the, I don't know, the most important skill to highlight or develop?
So I would say, you know, there's certainly nonprofits that have product managers. You also have creative agencies like digital agencies that have product managers who could be working with nonprofit clients. So I think those are ways where you can kind of leverage your nonprofit experience to get you the foot in the door, so that you can then start to grow the product management skills. But I think as a product manager, you know, we tend to be very pragmatic, very strategic, being able to influence a team and work with a variety, like become really comfortable working and leading cross-disciplinary teams. So be comfortable working with engineers. You don't need to be an engineer, but you do need to be able to speak and collaborate with engineers, being able to work with designers, being able to work with business unit owners. Like I would say, start by being really comfortable with leading a cross-functional team, and also being able to rally a cross-functional team around like a common product vision or a common product strategy. Those are really, really important skills. And also the ability to prioritize, because you're always going to get new requests. There's always going to be more work coming in, and the ability of a product manager to prioritize what you're focusing on and being able to communicate that back to like all the important players is a really critical skill.
All right, cool. Which side do you prefer, B2B, B2C?
Probably B2C. Yeah, I've done both. B2C is just a little bit more fun. So.
All right, that's good. I don't see any other questions, so I have my final question for you. So what would be that final, huge, important advice that you have for any aspiring product manager?
I would say build as much as you possibly can. That's the single best experience you can get, is like you just have to build and get experience, like, as you know, during the, if you can, you know, launching to like the product is like already out there to, you know, if you can get experience with like as much of that product life cycle, the better. But like as product managers, we're here to build, and you need that experience building and owning a product.
All right, cool. Thank you, Kara. Thank you.
You're
We really
welcome.
appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, with our community. And we hope to have you soon in another of our events. And thank you to the whole community. Thank you for joining us today. See you next week with more ASMA sessions, with more webinars, and more events. So feel free to go to proschool.com and see you soon. Bye. Thank you.